Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining this month's edition of the CMC Solves webinar series. Today we're going to cover the topic of the Service Members Civil Relief Act and how we avoid reputational risk and cost in dealing with that act. As always, this series is something that we're very interested in getting your feedback on. And we'd like to make sure that if you have questions that you use the facility that you have provided by the webinar, and that you let us know after the webinar as well if there are any additional topics that you'd like more information on, or topics you'd like to see us cover in subsequent webinars. So we'd really appreciate your feedback. Today we're going to talk about, in grand terms, what is SCRA's impact on us and what automation can be brought to bear on those problems. Starting with what's happening with the regulatory environment, the complexity of the problem at hand, and what we can do to deal with the reputational risk that represents. I'm pleased to be joined today by a co-presenter, joined by Matt Baylor, who's both CMC's head of client operations and a 12-year veteran of the banking industry. And so welcome, Matt.
Hi, Vitas. Thank you.
Glad to have you. And Matt will be covering a lot of the details about how we make this work. I mentioned earlier that your feedback is important. Just want to reiterate that. And if you have questions as you go on through the webinar as we're talking, please feel free to type them in, and we'll try to get some time at the end to cover them. So let's kick it off. You know that we've been in a regulatory zone of great aggressive regulators. And they are now not only more aggressively stalking the industry for the big game, but you're starting to see very large enforcement actions that are not just visible in terms of the dollar amounts, but the amount of damage that they've inflicted on the organizations. And not only do you have the federal regulators, but you've got states, attorneys general, and others that are also making both aggressive statements about what they want to do to us and what they're looking for. So we have that to worry about. And, you know, I know we're all busy day to day managing to our number and trying to meet our collections obligations and make that number, yet we're being bombarded by a host of different new requirements from the CFPB, from the OCC, from different equal opportunity lending regulations, the fact of how e-signature is, and in some cases isn't, relevant, and all of the examination procedures that are going on in the educational lending area, and the whole complaint handling area. But today, we're going to focus on SCRA, the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Now, that original act was written sometime ago, I think 2001, but in 2013, there were some updates to the act. In very high-level terms, it requires us to either postpone or suspend certain borrower obligations as it relates to different kinds of asset classes, trials, taxes, housing leases. But in addition, the latest law, turn of the crank, expands the protection for our service members from being evicted. It gives them some very liberal rights to terminate housing leases when they're moved in the course of their service. It puts particular strictures on what we can and cannot charge on debt that it was entered into prior to their service, and it also indicates that there are some specific protections, for example, in terms of their insurance coverages and other debt responses, as well as provide some tax relief if they have income, particularly of a spouse outside the home state. So if we try to take that most recent SCRA Act and boil it down to, so what does that mean for us? The pain points are really that I've got to be able to consistently identify and treat those people that are eligible for these SCRA benefits, and that, in fact, those benefits may vary based on where they are in the life cycle of their service. You also need to efficiently capture the active duty orders that would be the proof that you are fairly and consistently treating these service members. And then there are a number of business processes that are difficult and cumbersome and need to be managed in an error-free, end-to-end way. And if we could automate that end-to-end management of the business process, we would be much further along. But then we'd have to apply the specific business rules for the agents, and when the customer, who is also an SCRA-eligible beneficiary, is on the self-service site. And that means I need to be able to segment my customers for treatments that are appropriate to whatever step in the process they're in. So not just a workflow problem, but in many cases a re-decisioning based on the workflow step that they're at kind of problem. And then I need to have, from an organizational standpoint, operationally, a way to rapidly and systemically identify issues that aren't being handled in a timely fashion and escalate them, whether that's on us, something that we owe the customer, or whether it's on the customer to provide us with some piece of documentation or data or proof. And finally, a big pain point is proving that what you did was what the law requires for each of the individuals who are eligible for that specific treatment. So I'm going to jump into our interactive node here for a minute. I'm going to launch the poll question if I can figure out how to do that. And I'm going to ask you to answer this question about whether your organization has had any problems conforming with the guidance that the regulators have established concerning SCRA. So I'm going to leave the poll open for probably another 15 or 20 seconds because I see you guys are all very Johnny on the spot with your answers, which is great. I'm going to give you another 10 seconds and close it out. Excellent. So it looks like at least the people on this call are, half of us haven't had the SCRA come up for us yet, and the other half have dealt with or are dealing with it. So that's good to note. Let's move on with that then. So what does it mean? What do you have to be able to do to conform? And you see the gentleman with the stack of binders and papers there on the left. It really is picking that needle out of the haystack and identifying which borrowers are eligible and then maintaining your knowledge of the status of their eligibility, and then from that, individualize the treatments. And that means in some cases bypassing or avoiding actions you would have taken for that customer, in other cases adding certain actions specific to that customer, and modifying business processes as appropriate to the specifics of the SCRA requirements. And that is a pain, as you know, because we're trying to make sure that we have our business processes streamlined and consistent across all our customers, and along comes this small subset that I have to deal with differently, and therein lies almost the entire problem. The last bit to be able to conform is to be able to remember what it is you did and prove that you did the correct operational step to your auditors and demonstrate to the regulators that you're following through on all of the requirements. Another question that we get quite often is, so what if I don't conform? How do I help management help me to take action to address this risk? And there are a lot of different ways that we have been privy to with some of our clients. But in very basic terms, you can look at any enforcement action as a probabilistic event. And you can say, well, look, in this example, I see 200,000 accounts a month in collection, and I estimate you would have to do this for your own population. In my example, we keep the math simple because I'm Lithuanian and that's hard for me. So I'm going to just say 1% of my population are SCRA eligible. That means I've got 24,000 moments of truth a year, which are chances to succeed or fail at delivering an SCRA compliant experience. So if my enforcement action is 5 million, my expected value for each of those moments of truth is $208.33 every time that I do it right. Or conversely, an expected value cost of $208.33 every time I do it wrong. So I don't know if that's the way that you all have been going to your compliance people and justifying the expenditure, but I'd love to hear if there's a different way that you've come up with that works, because we'd like to share that among the others of us that are trying to get compliance folks to see the light. I hear more often than not that clients tell me, I don't have to justify it. All I have to do is say it's a compliance problem and I can get the resources, because that's just how we roll. So I don't know what's happening in your bank, your lending organization, but would be very curious to hear if there's a different methodology that you've used. I'd like you to consider for yourselves, I won't be able to tell you what everyone's answers were, whether you as an organization have specific operational procedures established that are expressly made to conform to the SCRA requirements. And, you know, I hear in talking to clients that they're somewhere between no, we'd like to and have plans to comply, and yes, we have some, but boy, we don't think we have it all covered. That's what we hear most often. And I don't know what your specific responses would be because I screwed up the poll questioning, but mea culpa on that one. Sorry. What I'd like to do now is turn it over to Matt and have Matt pick up on what is it that we can do to help.
Sure, thanks, Vitas. And if I think back to my days before joining CMC, working at the banks, there were few customer experience moments of truth that are more important than managing the SCRA process. No one that I've come across in the banking community lacks the desire to provide a great customer experience for our military heroes who are serving abroad and need help and need an easy way to manage their affairs, and their families at home to help manage those affairs. So there's, I think, always been a great desire to improve this customer experience. What I've experienced is a lack of good tools to help comply and to provide a good customer experience. And when you think of service members abroad who need help and need their benefits to take hold, there are a few themes that I see. One is you obviously have the heavy regulatory burden that Vitas talked about. It's a very paperwork intensive, somewhat of a red tape intensive process with a lot of documentation. You have the challenge of communication where someone may not be in the best place, frankly, to use a telephone or to access a website or to reach out to their bank. So you have the communication challenge. And truthfully, some of the laws are conflicting. There's a heavy burden to ensure privacy of a service member's private information, while there's equally a desire to make it easier for their family members, power of attorney, or someone who's handling their affairs to apply for benefits. So you sort of have all of these things coming together. And I think what I want to talk about is some of the specific tools that we provide at CMC that really puts you in a better position to not only comply and avoid the enforcement actions, but to provide the right customer experience where we all know we need and want to do that. So number one, if you know CMC, you know we deliver the unified customer dialogue, which starts with the data and the ability to identify service members within your portfolios, across your portfolios in a consistent way, to provide individualized customer experience by channel, understanding that while the regs are the same, the agent and the web and the mobile experiences will be a little bit different. So to satisfy those individual channel preferences while still maintaining all the key components of the law. The contact strategies, which are compliant and built in and can be executed as well as strategized. So we bring together both the strategy and execution in one place. And as Vitas mentioned, from an auditability perspective and a control perspective, there's a lot of benefit there. Discuss the heavy documentation burden in this process where you have the back and forth of service members, orders, that documentation around the beginning and the end of their deployment, which for many of the banks is a big tripping point. And you typically see a hodgepodge of back office representatives who are taking in snail mail, scanning it into a legacy document repository, maybe branch representatives getting physical documentation, documentation coming over email. So obviously there's a massive area of human error and inconsistency with all that paperwork and inefficiency, which we think we can help with. And that flows into some of the document image capturing and uploading that we'll talk about. So I'll just walk through some of the specific pain points and where we can help specifically with certain features. make the SCRA process better. So number one is in the variable manager feature of the system, knowing that you need to be able to identify and treat service members consistently across your portfolio starts with identifying who are the right customers who are eligible for the benefits and where are they in that life cycle. And the ability to create variables and manage variables in a central unified database that can basically be the foundation for your strategies and your communication is critical for consistency. So in this particular example, we're showing our agent desktop application, which is rendering a variable that we created specific for SCRA. So because we pulled in data from your various systems of record and normalized it and made it available in the system, we can now push out any number of flags or alerts to your call center or branch agents to see that a customer may be eligible for benefits or may actually be receiving benefits or may be coming up towards the end of life of those benefits based on their deployment dates. So here we've taken a variable in Variable Manager and we've exposed it to agents around the bank so they can consistently see where the customer is in that life cycle. Now I'm showing the actual Variable Manager application where various fields and data elements can be configured to be pushed out across the customer experience. So as I mentioned, it may be the eligibility for SCRA. It may be where someone is in the life cycle of the process, that they're perhaps in the process of submitting their documentation, or we're in the process of reviewing their documentation, or perhaps they were determined not to be eligible. Any number of different variables and fields can be created in Variable Manager to support these various processes and to keep things synced up with your system of record. We'll talk a little bit about Decision Tree Manager, which is CMC's proprietary decision engine that allows you to segment your portfolio and then ultimately provide the right treatment strategies. And just to give you a flavor for how that might play out in an SCRA situation, if you're familiar with our decision tree, it's a fairly intuitive layout and capability of, at the top of the house, taking your entire loan portfolio and then based on those variables that we discussed, segmenting out those populations into various buckets for treatment strategies. So that might, for example, result in a decision tree node for everyone who is eligible, everyone who has provided documentation, anyone who is perhaps SCRA across different product types, for example, insurance or mortgage or student loan, or perhaps anybody who is in a pending status and we want to queue those accounts up for review because the customer may be coming up on a key milestone as it relates to SCRA. Talk a little bit about the Document and Disclosure Template Manager, which is CMC's way of managing all of the documents, and that can be anything from an email to a letter to a disclosure that's popped up to call center agents. It is the content and the look and feel of those documents and templates. And given the challenges of SCRA, this becomes a very important tool. So number one, all of the forms or surveys or workflows that require some question and answer or survey-like capability can be configured within the Credagility application in the Document Template Manager. And I'm showing you on the screen right now just an example of some information that you might want to gather in a web-based survey or even over the phone with a call center agent, gathering the primary cardholder's information, the date of the deployment, which we know is critical, the duration, and specifically whether or not they are requesting benefits be applied to the account or if they're being applied to a cosigner's account or a family member's account. The user interface here is fairly flexible. It's HTML based and puts a lot of power in your hands to manage and control all of the forms with versioning and auditability for all of your forms, surveys, templates, communications related to SCRA. A critical piece is also maintaining the consistent data variables that we referred to earlier in the variable manager component. So when we've identified the key bits of data that are critical to this process and we put them into variable manager, I'm now pulling from that same unique source of variables for all of my different channel communications or surveys or workflows. So in this particular example, we're pulling in first name and last name and address from the same database, so that if I'm using any of these variables across the customer experience, in the call center, in the branch, in a letter, in an email, in a website, there's consistency in the data that we're using. And as mentioned, this can be deployed out in any number of forms, as a web-based survey form, as a disclosure for call center agents, a letter or email, and our clients can modify and manage all of that content within the system, versus say needing to make a call to technology support or to your technology vendor. Just turning a bit to our customer-facing website and the self-service portal that is part of the Credagility application, we want to look at the customer journey and identify service members such that when they visit the website or when their family members visit the website, we're immediately launching them into this the SCRA workflow experience. So as opposed to giving them some of the traditional account summary, balance information, the standard landing page on the website, CMC's hotspot capability can do a couple things. Number one is it will identify based on logging in who is or could potentially be a service member requiring benefits. And number two, it can launch that customer into a web journey that's specific to their needs. So if we know that they're SCRA eligible, but for example, we know that they have not yet provided the documentation, we can immediately launch into a workflow and prompt them to provide that documentation with some directions. So you've got a tailored customer experience on the website based on the variables that identify that person as possibly being eligible. And you can imagine that's a much better customer experience, that you're anticipating their needs and serving up the business process that they need to interact in. Within the website hotspot, we can also, using CMC's workflow capability, upload forms, which, as we know in SCRA, is a big pain point. So if I've identified that the request form or the orders in particular needed to be uploaded, the customer can upload that right into the website, either as a PDF document, a Word document, even an image of the document, a scan of the document, or if you can get good enough resolution, a picture right from your handheld device. So we talked about variable manager, decision tree, and document manager. Now we'll just talk a little bit more about the workflow capability, which is CMC's business process management tool, which allows you to connect workflows between agents and your customers, which for SCRA is very important. Allows you to create workflows to escalate any concerns to a manager or to a specialist who is responsible for SCRA and other special handling. It allows you to script out the disclosures and the various talk-off and comments that you want to make. And of course, every step of the process is logged with a timestamp and a name, so that we have full auditability and traceability of the customer experience through the process. So one example of a workflow that might make sense would be an escalation queue that can be created for special handling teams to serve up any account that has a complaint that has maybe gone over some number of days beyond the eligibility date. Any number of triggers can be used to set up this workflow queue and prompt the specialist to work through that account, and to see in task view what does that inventory look like, so that at a macro level, a call center manager or director can get a sense of the volume of SCRA cases that are being worked, where they are in the case life cycle, and if you're following any critical SLAs that you establish internally with your policies and procedures. In addition to the workflows, we can also simply build a queue of accounts that are SCRA eligible using certain criteria. So earlier we talked about segmenting our portfolio based on service members. We can additionally apply a queue action to that node, which essentially will push out any account that is in that node to call center agents, to special handling associates, and that queue criteria is driven off of the variable manager application that I showed earlier. Other things you can do with the queue, this can also help with reporting, just to also show the volumes of accounts that are flowing through the various stages of the process to stay on top of SLAs and standards. The workflow manager also allows you to push out forms and a list of tasks for your call center or branch agents or collectors. This essentially maps out all of the critical information that they need to gather. It puts guardrails around the conversation. It helps their talk off. And it essentially ensures that they have sort of the checklist of critical information. So instead of referring to an online training manual or perhaps a printed piece of paper on their cubicle, we're actually building all the critical steps right into their workflow in the business process tool. And this provides an example of what that might look like, where we're asking some yes/no radio button type questions, some drop-down button questions, some data format questions, all to drive the customer experience with the agents, but also to gather this information for reporting and analytics on the back end. Another example of how the answers to the questions will drive sort of the choose-your-own-adventure of the workflow, so that depending on the answer to one question will drive the agent down a different path for not only efficiency's sake, but for the better customer experience, that we're only asking the questions that are needed based on the workflow itself. So in this example, if we answered no to this question, that might drive this account into a manager queue or some other escalation queue based on that answer. With the built-in user and role administration in Credibility, when I build workflows, queues, or any other strategies, I'm also able to apply the right roles and users to those steps, so that if you have special handling folks or only certain types of people who are able and have the ability to handle these accounts, role and administration allows you to define which group of people are allowed to do which steps in the process. We talked a little bit about the website experience and the ability to upload images. This gives you a flavor of how you can manage some of that content and put out some good information while you're also prompting service members to upload their information or provide questions. So in the same way we guided the agent experience through a workflow, the website allows you to guide a customer through a similar workflow and allow them to self-serve whenever, wherever they are at a time that's convenient for them and a channel that's convenient for them. And then when those documents and answers are provided and are uploaded, those are immediately made available for your agents, so that you have consistency between the web experience and the call center experience, so that as soon as someone calls in, all of your enterprise-wide agents have the ability to see the same documentation and information or surveys that folks provided on the website. And they can complete the workflow and verify that the right documentation has been provided and check the box that they've reviewed it and verified it. want to pass it back to Vitas just to keep the survey questions going and wrap up.
Thanks, Matt. So as we said earlier, you're going to have to do this one maybe in your feedback back to us. Maybe you can fill out the webinar feedback that will happen in just about a minute. But we'd really love to know what is it that's preventing your organization from implementing any new solutions that could more tightly manage that set of SCRA eligible customers and get rid of manual processes and reduce the errors. So we're very curious to know what it is that is standing between you and the solution that you want, which is, of course, CMC. But in summary, we help solve the SCRA pain points that were identified earlier, and Matt's done a masterful job of walking us through each of these steps. So thank you for that, Matt.
Sure thing.
I think the important takeaway is that if you have an SCRA issue, we've got solutions that will help you address many, if not all, of the issues. But it's not just SCRA. There are many other specialty kinds of workflow, business process, manually intensive situations like complaints, credit bureau disputes, proof of fair lending, doing hardship programs, capturing income and expense, where the same Credagility platform and the tools that Matt walked through in detail for SCRA also apply. So kind of in closing, we're really interested in maintaining consistency and fairness of treatment, being able to gather additional data on the fly, individualizing the programs, and having an account-level auditability that we think is unparalleled, having it all driven off of a single data model that allows for very flexible, cost-effective solutions. So I see that our time is up. If you have questions we haven't had a chance to get to, why don't you put them in the into the survey feedback form, which will pop up as soon as I stop talking in 10 seconds. And if you'd like to give us more feedback, please send an email to us at the email address that you see on the screen. Love to hear from you. Hope that this was useful. Would like to hear from you about any other topics that you'd like us to cover in future CMC Solves. Thanks very much for your time.